April 3rd, 1974. Xenia, Ohio. The final bell has just rung at Xenia High School, but something is wrong. In the hallway, the air goes strange, almost weightless. A stray piece of paper lifts off the floor, not blown by a breeze, but floating, as if suspended in water. Lockers begin to hum. A low, electric thrum you feel in your teeth. There's a metallic taste in the air, like a mouthful of pennies. A teacher, her face pale, puts her hand on a classroom door, her knuckles white. Outside, a lone siren begins to wail, its pitch shifting, blurring, until it is drowned out by a sound that is UNT sounded all it is. A physical pressure, a deep, guttural roar, like a freight train bearing down on the building itself. A student, frozen in place, feels the breath catch in his throat. A teacher grabs a handful of younger kids, her lips moving, counting them under her breath. 1, 2, 3. Do you run? Do you drop? There's no time for a second guess. That morning, the ingredients for this moment were gathering across the sky. A massive surge of warm, wet air, all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, was pushing north, colliding with a cold, dry front sweeping down from the Rockies. High above, a powerful jet stream screamed eastward at over 150 miles per hour. This created an invisible, violent twist in the atmosphere, a phenomenon called wind shear. The sky became a cauldron, with the winds at different altitudes blowing in different directions, setting the stage for storms that wouldn't just rise, but spin. This wasn't just another stormy spring day. This was the setup for what would become the 1974 Super Outbreak, one of the most violent tornado events in recorded history. Before the next 24 hours were over, 148 tornadoes would tear across 13 states and even into Canada, claiming more than 300 lives and shattering communities across America's heartland. As the afternoon sky darkened, the human story began to unfold across hundreds of miles. In Xenia, a high school senior named Mike stood by a window, watching the clouds turn a sickening, bruised shade of green and purple he'd never seen before. He knew, instinctively, that this was more than just a storm. In a television studio in Louisville, Kentucky, a local meteorologist stared at the teletype machine, spitting out urgent bulletins. The phones in the newsroom were ringing off the hook, then going silent as lines went down. On screen, the radar was lighting up with angry red splotches. He pointed, his voice steady but strained, trying to warn people who might not be listening, whose power was already flickering out. Across the Ohio River in Brandenburg, Kentucky, a volunteer firefighter sat in his truck, the crackle of the scanner filling the cab. He listened to reports of a massive tornado tracking directly toward his town, his stomach tightening as he thought of his family, his neighbors, everyone on the other side of that river. He gripped the steering wheel, waiting for the call he knew was coming, and hundreds of miles away, in a quiet, sterile room at the National Weather Service in Kansas City, a forecaster stared at his radar screen. He saw the classic, terrifying hook, echoes the signature of a tornado-producing supercell blossoming one after another. With a knot in his stomach, he began issuing the warnings, drawing lines on a map that represented paths of potential devastation, knowing each line was a community, a town, a life. Back in that Ohio hallway, the world tilted. The supercells that had been born over Indiana were now racing across the border into Ohio and Kentucky at highway speeds. They were monsters of wind and rain, moving with a horrifying velocity. For the student frozen in the Xenia High hallway, the decision was made for him. The overhead lights flickered once, then died, plunging the corridor into a terrifying twilight. The pressure dropped so suddenly his ears popped. Then came the sound of implosion. The windows didn't just break. They atomi said, spraying inward in a cloud of glittering dust. The roar was no longer outside, it was inside, everywhere. He lunged for a doorway, his hands outstretched, reaching for a frame that was already starting to splinter, a fragile hope against the vortex that had finally arrived. In the same breath, it takes the school. Cinder blocks flex in the walls, mortar dust puffing between the seams. A steel fire door inhales, then exhales, bending in its frame. Through the window, a piano, that massive, immovable heart of the music room, is lifted and thrown like a dry leaf. A teacher's voice.com just a moment before is swallowed mid-syllable by a roar that isn't just sound. Bat pursue, a physical weight that crushes the air from your lungs. Sentences become thoughts, fractured and desperate. Get down. Cover your head. On televisión, the local meteorologist's voice trembles but holds steady. He's pointing, naming streets, his finger tracing the terrifying hook echo on the radar. If you are in Green Acres, if you are on Smithville Road, you need to be in your shelter right now. This is a confirmed, large, and extremely dangerous tornado on the ground. Behind him, the studio lights flicker and die. The broadcast stays on, powered by a generator. A producer holds a flashlight beam on a paper map as the city holds its collective breath. Landlines are dead. Cell towers are gone. The warnings are now just echoes in the wind. In Brandenburg, Kentucky, the volunteer firefighter hears the sirens climb. He looks toward the Ohio River and sees it's no longer water, but a churning, angry, spray-blown sky. The sky itself has turned the color of a deep bruise, a false dusk at 3 in the afternoon. The roar is coming. A choice tears through him, a decision of seconds that feels like an eternity. Drive to the fire station as protocol demands, or race straight for the ridge where the trailer park sits, exposed and vulnerable. He knows his neighbors are up there. He knows what that wind can do. Miles away, in a quiet, sterile room at the National Weather Service office in Kansas City, a forecaster stares at his screen, his blood running cold. It's not one storm, not two. The radar is lit up, a constellation of death. Multiple, powerful, long-track supercells are marching across the map. This isn't just a bad day anymore. This is a historic, catastrophic outbreak. He shouts to a colleague, "Get me Indianapolis. Now. We need more watches, south and east, right now." Every second wasted is a life gambled. He knows the math. He knows what's coming. The system is collapsing under the strain. A snapped power line severs communication for 3 counties. A fallen oak tree blocks the main road, trapping an ambulance just a mile from a disaster zone. A father, sent to the store for milk, is now separated from his family by a mile-wide path of absolute annihilation. His route home erased from the map. Choices made in a split second have now become permanent, unchangeable facts of survival or loss. The names become a litany, a roll call of devastation. Xenia, ojalá not. Just it, but scrubbed from the earth. An entire neighborhood's gone. Brandenburg, torn in half. Louisville, bracing as a monster cell bears down on the city. The western suburbs of Cincinnati are next in line. Small towns all along the Ohio River, places with names like daisies and maples, are being hammered into the ground. The machine is relentless, feeding on the warm, unstable air, a chain reaction of atmospheric violence. Beneath the splintered wreckage of what was once a living room, a survivor blinks dust from their eyes. The first roar, the one that took everything, has passed. But now, through the silence, a new sound begins. It's different. It's different, deeper, more resonant, a vibration felt in the bones. It's the sound of another monster, far to the south. In the forecast office, the weary meteorologist sees it forming, a new nightmare on the screen. He leans into his microphone, his voice barely a whisper, a warning for those still in the path, under a sky that has gone completely, unnaturally. Night, tornadoes. The school vanishes. Not in a single, cinematic explosion, but piece by agonizing piece. A wall of cinder blocks begins to flex, groaning like a living thing. A steel door inhales, then exhales, buckling in its frame. In the music room, a grand piano, solid and heavy just moments before, is lifted and tossed like a dry leaf. A teacher's voice, trying to shout instructions, is simply swallowed by the noise, cut off. The world is reduced to a roaring, grinding present tense, miles away, in a television studio. The lights flicker. A meteorologist, his voice trembling but miraculously steady, points at a glowing red hook on the radar. He's not talking about counties anymore. He's calling out specific neighborhoods, street by street. If you're in Indian Hills, take cover now. This is on your doorstep. Phones are dead. A producer grabs a flashlight, its weak beam dancing across the paper weather map as the city outside holds its breath. The high-tech warnings have fallen back to a beam of light and a desperate human voice. In Brandenburg, Kentucky, the first siren wails. A volunteer firefighter watches the Ohio River, normally placid, being whipped into a fury of white spray. The sky darkens as if night has fallen at 3 in the afternoon. A gut-wrenching choice freezes him for a second. Head to the station and follow protocol, or drive straight to the trailer park on the ridge where he knows people are most exposed. He knows there's no right answer, only a race against time. The engine roars to life. He chooses the ridge. At the National Weather Service office in Kansas City, the mood is grim. The forecaster stares at his screen, not at one supercell, but a constellation of them. A family of violent storms, all spinning, all producing tornadoes, lighting up the radar like a terrifying Christmas tree. This isn't just a bad day anymore. He understands, with a cold pit in his stomach, that this is a historic, catastrophic outbreak. He shouts to a colleague, "Get new watches out for the South, now." Every minute we waste is costing lives. The signal goes out, a digital prayer sent into the chaos. The system is breaking down. Power lines snap, severing communication lines just when they renege most. A frantic call for an ambulance is met with silence. On the highways, roads are instantly blocked by debris, trapping first responders, snaring families trying to flee. A father tells his son to run for the basement while he secures the windows, a split-second decision that separates them. A mother, caught in traffic, can only watch the storm descend on the neighborhood where her children are in daycare. There is no time to think, only to react. The names become a tragic roll call, etched into the landscape by the storm's fury. Xenia, Ohio. Thriving city is simply leveled, scoured from the map. Across Indiana, towns are hammered, one after another. New supercells, monstrous and menacing, bear down on Louisville, on the western suburbs of Cincinnati, and on the small communities huddled along the banks of the Ohio River. The destruction is not random. It's a methodical, brutal march across the Heartland. Beneath the wreckage of what was once a home, a survivor stirs. The immediate roar has passed, but the silence is filled with a new sound, a deeper, more resonant rumble from far away. To the south, in a small mill town called Guin, Alabama, the sun has set, but the sky hasn't turned to a starry expanse. It's gone a sickening ink. Back in the forecast office, a voice drops to a near whisper, filled with a new kind of dread as he looks at the radar. Night tornadoes. The world goes sideways. In Guin, Alabama, it's not just a storm, it's a monster. A mile-wide wedge of pure fury, black against the green-gray sky, chewing up the earth. It doesn't just destroy, foundations are wiped clean, as if a giant hand just scraped them from the concrete. Trees that have stood for a century are reduced to splintered, naked stubs in seconds. Survival becomes a game of inches, of split-second decisions. A family struggles with a jammed crawlspace door, the wood swelling in the humid air, the roar outside growing from a freight train to a physical blow. Down the street, a dozen people cram into a neighbor's small storm cellar. The air grows hot, thin, tasting of damp earth and fear. As the house above them disintegrates, they hold their breath, listening to the world end. A postman, caught out on his route, shields a small, crying child with his leather mailbag, the reinforced hide a pathetic but defiant shield against flying debris. Hundreds of miles north, along the Ohio River, another beast is born. It carves a path through the suburbs of Cincinnati and Louisville. The great steel bridges connecting states shudder and groan, their massive structures vibrating like guitar strings. Barges, heavy with coal and grain, are ripped from their moorings and tossed like toys. The sirens, designed to cut through any noise, are swallowed whole by a wind that screams beyond the range of human hearing. In a downtown TV station, A meteorologist, face lit only by a flashlight after the power fails, stays on air. His voice is a calm, steady anchor in the storm. Even as the building around him groans under the strain, the windows bowing inward, he doesn't stop broadcasting. He can't. In the wreckage of what was once a quiet cul-de-sac, a volunteer firefighter crawls on his belly. The world is a splintered maze of collapsed walls and shattered lives. He's following a voice, a faint cry for help. He navigates by sound, the desperate calls, the ominous tick-tick-tick of a leaking gas meter somewhere in the darkness, and the frantic, heavy thud of his own heart against his ribs. Every move is a risk. Every piece of debris he shifts could bring the rest of the structure down. But the voice is there, and so is he. It's the small things that tell the real story. Pink insulation, torn from attic walls, drifts down like a gentle, toxic snow, coating everything in a surreal layer of pink. Miles away from its home, a family photo album is found impaled on a barbed wire fence, its pages flapping in the wind, a silent testament to a life scattered to the four winds. In a kitchen obliterated from existence, a single wall remains, and on it, a clock, its second hand frozen at the exact moment the power and everything else was cut. But even in the heart of the chaos, the warnings don't stop. They become a desperate, vital thread of hope. In Kentucky, a ham radio operator, his antenna whipping violently, relays a storm spotter's panicked report. It's on the ground, and it's huge. The message reaches a rural school, buying teachers and students 10 precious seconds to scramble into the hallways, a 10-second gift of life. Further down the tornado's path, a sheriff's deputy, his car's lights flashing against the apocalyptic sky, abandons his vehicle and runs from house to house. Pounding on doors is shouts, barely audible over the approaching roar, urging people to take cover just moments before the monster arrives. Then, almost as suddenly as it began, the violence subsides. As dawn approaches, the last of the vortices spin themselves out, weakening into harmless gusts. The deafening roar of the wind falls away, replaced by the steady, almost gentle sound of rain. The silence that follows is profound, shocking. It's a silence that feels heavier than the noise it replaced, broken only by the distant, mournful cry of sirens and the soft, menacing hiss of ruptured gas lines. First, light bleeds over the horizon, revealing the scale of the devastation. From the air, it's a scar, a raw, gaping wound miles wide, cut indiscriminately across the Heartland, across towns, fields, and forests. And from the ground, they emerge, figures covered in gray dust, looking like ghosts in their own ruined lives. They stumble out of what remains of their homes, into a landscape they no longer recognize, calling out names into a wind that no longer answers. The day after. Silence. What once were neighborhoods are now just lines etched into the earth. Roads lead to nowhere. 2 foundations wiped clean. A water tower, once a town's proud landmark, is now bent like a discarded straw. This is the morning of April 4th, 1974. Across America's heartland, survivors move with a slow, dazed purpose. There's no need for dramatic music. The truth of the landscape speaks for itself. In less than 24 hours, one of the most violent tornado outbreaks in history tore across 13 states and into Canada. 148 tornadoes. Over 300 lives lost, thousands injured. Among them were 7 F5 South, the most powerful storms imaginable on the Fujita scale. Communities like Xenia, Ohio, Brandenburg, Kentucky, and Guin, Alabama, were nearly erased from the map. The devastation reached the edges of major cities like Cincinnati and Louisville, leaving a scar that stretched for thousands of miles. It was a storm system of unprecedented scale and ferocity. Into this scene of immense destruction stepped a quiet, observant man, Dr. T. Theodore Fujita, a meteorologist who had studied the atomic blast sites in Japan. He saw patterns in the chaos that others missed. He walked the debris fields, not just with grief, but with a forensic eye. He pointed to suction spots in the rubble, curious circular patterns of debris, and realized what they meant. These weren't single funnels. Some of these tornadoes were monstrous clusters of smaller, violent vortices, rotating within the main circulation. His work gave us the Fujita scale, a way to measure a tornado's power by the ruin it leaves behind. It was a grim but necessary science, turning tragedy into lessons that would, into future, save countless lives. In the immediate aftermath, the spirit of the Heartland rose to meet the devastation. Hospitals, overwhelmed and often damaged themselves, set up makeshift triage centers in hallways and parking lots. Churches became shelters for the homeless and, heartbreakingly, temporary morgues for the dead. Strangers became neighbors, forming bucket brigades to clear rubble, searching for anything salvageable. In an era before cell phones, amateur ham radio operators became a vital lifeline, reconnecting families torn apart by the storm. This disaster was a wake-up call. In its wake, policies shifted dramatically. The NOAA weather radio network was expanded, warning systems were overhauled, and the Skywarn spotter network grew, putting more trained eyes on the sky. Meteorologists and forecasters, haunted by the outbreak, dedicated themselves to improving lead times, fighting for every precious second of warning. But amid the statistics and the science, the story of the Super Outbreak is written in small, human moments of resilience. It's the high school student in Xenia, wandering through the skeleton of her school, who finds her locker door, dented but intact, with her name still on it. It's the firefighter who finds a single, undamaged family photos and gently places it on the steps of a porch that no longer has a house attached to it. It's the mother in Guin, separated from her child in the chaos, who calls out her daughter's name and, after a heart-stopping silence, hears a small voice, answer back. In these moments, grief and hope exist side by side, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The towns were rebuilt, the scars on the landscape eventually faded, but the wind left a permanent map, not just on the land, but in the memory of a generation. The 1974 Super Outbreak changed how we see the sky, how we prepare for the storm, and how we come together in its aftermath. It's a story of immense loss, but also of incredible resilience and progress. Thank you for watching. If you want to explore more true stories of disasters that shaped our world and learn the lessons they hold, please consider subscribing to our channel. Understanding the past helps us prepare for the future, because the next time the sirens sound, knowing what those seconds are worth can make all the difference. Stay safe.